Of all the cars sold in Australia in the past year, just under 1 in 5 were Australian-made. The government's trying to keep the industry viable and pumped almost $750 million into it last year. Australia has 3 multinational car manufacturers, but there are real questions about how long they can keep designing cars for the local market or whether they might abandon it altogether. Greg Hoy reports.
Want to buy a new car? Then come to Australia. With tiny tariffs and a sky-high dollar, there's now 65 brands to choose from here as opposed to just 35 in the US.
Australia is actually one of the most open markets on the entire planet.
And last year, 81% of Australians chose imported cars over bigger and thirstier homegrown passenger vehicles. Regardless, taxpayers subsidise the car industry to the tune of $721 million, raising an obvious question.
Can the Australian economy survive without a domestic car industry?
I think whilst there's a mining boom, the answer is clearly yes, but you know, there'll come a time when that tide will turn. And
well, my attitude is it's not particularly important. That sounds like a terribly hard-hearted thing to say.
Dr Nicholas Gruen was a key player in the Hawke government's radical rationalisation of the auto industry, the Button Car Plan.
We should be trying to make the jobs in the automotive industry as productive as other jobs or get rid of them.
This country is one of only 13 in the entire world that has the capability to not only design, but to engineer and manufacture vehicles. And it's a very sought-after capability, and it's one that I think the country should fight for.
Spinning the wheels of the economy. But for all 60,000 jobs and high-tech skills it produces with taxpayer assistance, there's another big question hanging over the Australian car industry.
Can we assume that the 3 manufacturers still standing will survive?
I don't think you can ever assume that. I certainly think that every effort will be made to make sure that happens. But one of the problems we do have in our Australian car industry is that we don't own it.
No, we certainly shouldn't assume that. I think it's quite likely that Ford will not be here in 10 years' time.
It's the biggest car race. Once upon a time, Australia had 7 car manufacturers sharing 80% of car sales, protected by 57% tariffs on imports. Today, tariffs are 5%, and local products of Toyota, Holden and Ford must fight it out for just 19% of local sales or less.
So who is most vulnerable? All 3 car makers are doing it tough. Production down, profits, once taxpayer funding is deducted, are negligible. General Motors Holden has been doing its best to hose down engineers' claims that the next all-Australian Commodore will be the last to be designed here.
The notion of engineering a Commodore in this country or in another place certainly is a competitive thing that we wouldn't disclose at this point in time.
But why deny that you're planning to switch to a global design, as is the accepted view throughout the industry?
The world has changed over the last decade or so, and generally is moving towards global platforms. Whether that happens to be the case in this country, decisions have not been made.
Making 66,000 Commodores last year, a third for export, including police cars for the US, Holden's production 5 years ago was double that. Holden has, however, heavily invested to begin building alongside its big and thirstier Commodores the popular and previously imported compact car, the Chevrolet Cruze.
We have a plant that has supreme flexibility. We are able to then adjust what we build, the big one or the small one, and then our ability to opportunistically go after the export markets when they present themselves to us.
And with alternative fuel versions available, analysts approve of Holden's strategy. The same for Toyota, which last year made 120,000 odd Camrys and Orions, 2/3 for export, down by a quarter on 5 years ago, but well positioned for growth when the global economy recovers.
Toyota, prior to the GFC, for every Camry and Orion they sold in Australia, that they made in Australia, they were selling another 2 in the Middle East. That was a huge achievement.
And that brings us to Ford, unavailable for interview to discuss its future. It is Ford's future in Australia that most concerns the analysts.
Gee, getting down to, I would have thought, some of the dangerous territory in terms of low volume.
Production of Ford's big flagship, the Australian-designed Falcon, fell to 44,000 vehicles last year, the newer territory 13,000. With no export or small car strategy in place, Ford is pinning hopes of a recovery on the fuel savings of gas and diesel versions of its large vehicles, or fitting the big Falcon with a small engine. Analysts are underwhelmed.
Ford over the years should have done a lot more on the export market and joined Toyota and Holden in finding export markets.
We should be saying to Ford, as in my opinion we should have said some time ago, if you want to get all this assistance that we're handing out, we want to see some serious sign that this is developing a strategic asset.
Industry insiders believe Ford will soon need to produce a new investment strategy in order to secure its manufacturing future here. And that, like Holden, this time that's unlikely to include an Australian-designed vehicle. But the auto industry argues in order to secure such investment, further government funding will be required, and not just for Ford.
It's time to put together a solid, credible proposal that is competitive to the rest of the world if we want to ensure the survival of the automotive sector into the decades to come.
Some say with import competition only set to increase and fuel prices sure to rise as the world economy recovers, Australia should consider courting other car makers.
I would have held a beauty contest. I would have said, we want to have bids from manufacturers. We want to hear what they're going to do with these assets to make them really good strategic parts of the global automotive industry.
We're going to see a lot more Chinese into the market here. We're going to see their quality levels improve very rapidly.
The Chinese will certainly come in. We are a massive manufacturer in China as well. So I wouldn't rule out at some future date General Motors operations in China shipping something to Australia.
If that sounds bleak for local manufacturing, there are rays of hope and inspiration on our own doorstep. Despite fierce global competition, the all-Australian engineered auto parts manufacturer Futurus is flourishing in Australia, in China, in Thailand, South Africa and even North America.
Over the next 3 or 4 years, we should double our revenue streams. This sector, in my mind, is a bit like New York. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. It's all about continuous improvement.
Greg Hoy reporting.